There we go.
Teachers, not politicians, should decide when it makes sense to engage parents. Bill 24.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Agree or Disagree the podcast. This is Kevin Olenek. Thank you for joining us. Alberta Politics continues to be a cause of conversation and controversy. It's far more interesting in Alberta politics, I have to tell you, guests, when we get to you, than BC politics. Although BC politics has its own fascination, I feel like Alberta politics would live on a soap opera and do very well. It's either a leadership race or an election, or perhaps a rumor of an election. We won't talk about that today. Or a simple conversation like a gay-straight alliance. The clip you heard from the beginning there was from Jason Kenney, as he announced yesterday that his new UCP party is opposing Bill 24. And you heard the major reason why. It's about teachers. Today, Rachel Notley tweeted, and let me pull that up. I feel really organized as I'm talking here. Rachel Notley tonight tweeted, as we're talking, To this evening, I was proud to stand in Ab Ledge and voice my support for Bill 24 for GSAs and more importantly for LGBTQ students and their allies. This bill will protect the lives of some of our most vulnerable citizens. This is our topic today. We are going to talk about Bill 24, what's working, how this is going, and how we got here. And today we have three guests. Barb Silva has been on before. She was on to promote the movie Backpack Full of Cash. She is from Support Our Students. Barb, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. It was kind of last minute, but we got it together. Nikki Colby is joining us. Hello, Nikki.
Hi.
Nikki is a parent of a LGBT child. And she will have an interesting perspective because parent is one of the words that is coming up a lot in this conversation. So I felt like we needed a parent to come into this conversation. And the Liberal leader of the Alberta Liberal Party is David Kahn, and he is joining us as well. All of these fine folks are in Alberta as I am sitting here in Vancouver, and we are joining this by Google Hangout. How are you, David?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. And the way that we're going to start this, I guess, is with the easiest low-hanging fruit. Actually, before we do that, I think maybe, Barb, I don't know if your organization is as well known as maybe it should be. So can you give us maybe an indication of tell us who you guys are and what you do, and we'll then start on the low-hanging fruit.
Sure. So, Support Our Students Alberta is a public education advocacy organization. We are a citizens group comprised mostly of parents, and our goal is to promote a public education system that is equitable and accessible to all children, and we believe very strongly that when we build a system around our most marginalized students, and that would be LGBTQ, kids living in poverty, kids with disability, kids with food insecurity, when we build a system that's focused on them, we elevate the quality and experience for all Alberta students. And so that's our goal, is to redefine and recommit to a truly public education system, which here in Alberta we feel we have deviated from on several fractures.
Okay. Cool. So there we go. For those who don't know, that's what Support Our Students does. So let's start with the low-hanging fruit. And by low-hanging fruit, we're going to start with Jason Kenney and the UCP party. And I'm going to ask the somewhat easy question here, I think, for all of you, is where did Jason Kenney get this all wrong? And Rob Breckenridge actually wrote a very interesting column yesterday, I believe, talking about what a strategic mistake it was for Jason Kenney to actually oppose Bill 24. So I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts there first. Let's start with Kenney, the low-hanging fruit in this conversation.
So I don't think he made a mistake as far as his electorate was concerned. I think that he was, and so he went for broke.
What do you mean by that?
If he's understanding his the numbers the way that he's been presented to them, or they've been presented to him, he sees that this is Rachel Notley's to lose, and providing he says the right things, and you'll, especially in his commentary from today, he sort of catered to the center, and there's nothing in there that the center voters are going to find egregious. Do I agree with him? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean that everybody gives it as much thought. I don't think that he actually did, for his voting populace, anything wrong. I don't think they think he did anything. And I think he thinks he can't lose. So why not? He wants to push.
I would agree 100% with Nikki there. I think everything Kenney does, we have to consider that it's very strategic, it's very calculated, and it's measured. I think that he knows the bill is going to pass anyway, and so in opposing it, he gets to speak to his base, who is plugged in and concerned with this. And he also knows, I think, that that a lot of people aren't paying as close attention. There's a huge population in Alberta that is disengaged, that isn't listening to all these details, and so he's going to get to play both sides of that coin. He's played to his base. The bill goes through. He's on the record as having opposed it. So this, to me, is not an error on his part. It's a very calculated, strategic move.
Well, I think he spouted a number of inaccuracies in his statements. I do agree that this kind of level of detail or granularity is often lost on a population that's very concerned with the paychecks and picking up their kids at school and paying the next bill and other pressing day-to-day quotidian matters. But he said things like these GSAs were targeted at 5-year-olds and that they were teaching curriculum. So he's trading in factual inaccuracies at a minimum to get to bolster his position. But I tend to think that this was an opportunity for him to consult with his caucus as the leader and come to a more nuanced decision that might mean backing up on his comments earlier this year that parents should be notified, and maybe coming to changing course and saying that in consultation with his new caucus and in thinking about the issue further, he doesn't. He thinks that GSAs are a good idea and have been and has come to learn more of the research that they save lives, and he could have, as they say in politics, pivoted a little bit. And certainly earlier this year his comments were meant to play to his base, but now he's got to play to all Albertans. And for example, 70 or 75% of Albertans are okay with gay marriage, for example. So I think he's sort of stuck in an old narrative that opposing gay rights or anything gay rights related is something that his base is going to be against, and I think he's sort of lost that train, or he's on a train that's stopped at a station from 10 or 15 years ago.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I think he's talking out of two sides of his mouth. Personally, I think he's trying to placate both sides, because all this rhetoric. First of all, he's very much using the talking points of a blog put out by Parents for Choice in Education, whom he is the only sort of education group he'll reference. So on one hand, he knows the bill's going to pass, but he's also talking a lot about this, as David referenced, 5-year-olds and curriculum. And so he's trying to muddy the waters around what GSAs truly are and what this bill is truly about. So he's trying to mislead the general public who might not be as informed on what GSAs do, and cloud it with issues around parental rights, cloud it with issues of government schools, which is like what they like to refer to as general public schools. And they're trying to make this seem as an issue around government raising your children. So while the average Albertan is okay with a lot of these issues, if he presents them as a completely different issue, as parental rights and government's raising your children, then he's trying to score points there. And so that's the danger. The danger is that he's not presenting this as an issue of safety for children. He's presenting this as an issue of somebody trying to parent your 5-year-old child.
Government overreach. Yeah.
Government overreach. I mean, how many 5-year-olds join clubs at all?
Right. And so, yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of confusion for this. Sorry, we lost Nikki in the midst of the conversation, so I'm adding her as we speak.
Sure.
There we go. Sorry about that. But it feels like there's a lot of... Has there been a lot of confusion about this? Has it been far too much confusion on this?
Well, I think Kennedy has stoked that confusion, as we just discussed, with bringing in factual inaccuracies about what a GSA is and what it does and what's involved with it. And he's done that on purpose to make this issue a lot more complicated than it really should be. And for those of us who are very plugged into these things, it seems very straightforward. But with all the misinformation flying around, I don't blame Albertans for just seeing a lot of noise and a lot of polarity and a lot of politicization of this issue, to the point where it's frankly not looking that great from either side, because it's become so politicized.
Okay. Barb, are you here? Yes, you are.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm still here.
Okay.
No, I'm still...
Okay, good. Technical issues as we're doing this. Hang on here.
I'll just agree with David on that, in the sense that I think a lot of people don't really understand how benign a GSA really is. And a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the language being used is being very much inflammatory in terms of keeping parents out and not informing parents. And we're losing this idea that children can speak to their parents and do speak to their parents every single day. That we can mitigate any of those concerns by having open dialogue. Parents are welcome in schools across this province every day. And so, there's a real lack of understanding of what GSAs really mean, how benign they actually are, but the value that they create in terms of creating safe, inclusive spaces for children, and that value has to supersede anything else. And that we don't have to imagine this huge overreach as something as egregious, in the sense that what the UCP is trying to portray it as. And that's where we need some more clarification on what a GSA is.
So let's do that just quickly while we're here. What is the intention of a GSA for those who are completely confused, if there's any confusion out there?
Well, it's a place for kids to gather and talk. It's a gay, straight alliance. So kids come, and when we've spoken to kids who have been parts of GSAs, sometimes they're just eating pizza and hanging out, and sometimes they're talking about whether they're questioning their sexuality or not. Sometimes they're talking about feeling lonely. And sometimes it's just a place that's not outside on a cold winter day that they can go and hang out with their friends. And it's no different than any other club. It doesn't, at a chess club, it doesn't mean they're only ever talking chess. At the audiovisual club, it doesn't mean they're 100% talking about audiovisual all the time. It's a social club, and it's a place where kids can ask questions, feel safe, feel secure, nothing more, nothing less, and they're needed. It's known that they're needed.
Yeah, it's a very straightforward concept in my view. But the problem is this is a perfect storm or an intersection of school-age children, sexual orientation and gender identity, parental rights, faith and religion, and even sex ed gets conflated in there because the right likes to insinuate that some kind of sex ed is curriculum or teaching is taking place in this GSAs, and we've seen how politicized the introduction of sex ed has been in this province and in farther down the line in Ontario, and it's been used very effectively by the right to attack the government and politicize the issue. but I think the right isn't alone guilty of this. The NDP waited for a very particular time to introduce this GSA legislation. They could have bolstered the GSA legislation a year or two ago if they had wanted to, but they waited until this session because they were forecasting that Kenney would be around, and this is really his Achilles heel. He demonstrated that in March. I think when he floated this idea of parental notification, I think that was a strategic mistake in itself. He should never have, it played well to some of his base, but I think it's just a lightning rod in a very dangerous road to go down. So I think he should never have touched it with a 10-foot pole to begin with earlier this year, and now he's sort of doubled down. And the NDP expected him to, so they've planned this all out. So, my point is that they're not the NDP, the Conservatives aren't alone in politicizing this issue.
Okay, yeah, so let's get to the tougher question as we're still waiting for Nikki. But the tougher question maybe is, and David brought this up in his statement, that he felt both the UCP and the NDP were using this issue as a wedge issue. And can you guys elaborate where you think the NDP went wrong here? What could the NDP have done better on this to make this easier for everyone? If that's a word that you would like to use, or
well, they're using this issue as to polarize Alberta politics and to label the UCP and Kenney as the homophobes, and they're LGBTQ friendly or supportive, and they're sort of making it an either or. And at the very fulcrum of this new session with Kenney as leader, but the fact is that there's been problems with GSAs since Bill 10 was introduced in terms of schools not following it, it not being implemented, and not being enforced in different school districts and in different schools. So we've had these problems for several years now, and in my view, they've waited too long to deal with these issues, and they've purposely politicized it such that it is becoming difficult to know what's going on and what are the motivations behind each camp, and it's really instead of focusing on the evidence that GSAs really help children, we're focusing on the politics of it and the right and the left and this sort of grand battle between them.
Yeah, because it's coming across a bit like this is a strategic move for Kenney, but it's also a strategic move for the NDP in that the timing of when you present this is interesting in that, because I'm personally kind of confused about maybe the difference between Bill 10 and Bill 24. I feel like there's some confusion about that.
I think there's a few things at play, and I think the NDP has done a few things to get it wrong. I mean, for sure, this is strategic. I mean, they presented it as the Kenney clause. I mean, that is stoking a fire. You're poking the bear, and that most definitely is making this, an issue like that David is alluding to here. That it's becoming polarizing discussion around something that should be, in our opinion, as public education advocates, about public education. Really, it's about making school equitable and accessible for all children. If that means having a GSA, then we have GSAs. And that, when you're a government and you're trying to promote public educations and schools don't comply, they should no longer be getting public funds. It's very simple. And once you redefine and recommit what public education is, all of those schools fall through those. They either meet those requirements or they don't meet those requirements. And you start making parameters that are very obvious. That's what Bill 24 is really trying to do, is saying we're now going to put in new parameters. You are not allowed to out children, which is what Bill 10 missed. Okay? Bill 24 was literally made, they called it the Kenney Clause because Kenney had come out saying we're going to notify parents. And that's all Bill 24 does, is sort of clarify that aspect that you cannot out a child. But for sure, it's been a mistake on the NDP's part to call this the Kenney Clause. They needed to educate people on what GSAs truly are, because now what you have is people who think GSAs are great, and you have people who think it's government overreach. And those are the two. You've split people into those two camps.
And it's also been the ministers sort of fiddling and not coming out strong enough, in my view, with respect to the enforcement of the original Bill 10 that's got us to this place where we have to come out with another whole bill to strengthen the weaknesses of Bill 10, which a lot of the weakness has to do with the lack of enforcement and authority by the government to enforce it.
100%. 100%. This is really, you can extend this to a lot of other areas of public education, where we are the only province in Canada to have charter schools, to fund private schools to the extent that we do. We've given all of these school boards a lot of autonomy to the extent where they feel that they can implement different curriculum, loosely play with regulation. And we need government now more than ever to say, if you're receiving public funds, you need to comply with the legislation related to public education. And if you can't, then you're no longer an accredited system. And that was seen more than ever with Trinity Wisdom, people who are blatantly saying that they will not comply with Bill 10. And that's the failing of the government. They were pushed to do Bill 24, and now they've made Bill 24, they believe it's a deal breaker for a lot of people, in the sense that if Kenney can't comply with Bill 24, that will be a deal breaker for most voters. I don't think that that's true.
Why?
Because I don't think enough of Albertans really understand it. I think a lot of people who might be in the center either don't understand what a GSA is, they don't understand its value, and they will find other topics, other issues that they will place more importance on, that they will want to vote Conservative on, and primarily pipelines or economics or taxes. And
right.
That will trump their social issues.
Yeah, I'm heartened by how far we've come in terms of LGBTQ awareness and respect and rights in our society, but in the end, it is a relatively small minority, and so most parents are likely not going to have an LGBTQ child, so they're may not have to be directly worried about this issue, but thinking through that, where that falls down is we know that everyone has a gay niece or nephew or uncle or aunt or family member or friend or coworker. So these things promulgate pretty fast, and I think there's a lot more awareness about mental health issues, about inclusiveness, about making our society better for all, and that is a good for society in general. So I hope that this issue is important for the majority of Albertans. But meantime, I feel, and as a politician, I have to get involved in this too. But and I support GSAs. I know that I've read the scientific evidence. I know that they help our children, but it does feel like we're really just playing political football with children's well-being.
And that's where I think, have the NDP actually campaigned, sort of presented a campaign on the value of GSAs, on the value of mental health, on the value of inclusion in our public system. If they had talked about the value of that on a wider scale, as opposed to using this as an issue to get Kenney, we would have had a much broader conversation. We would have been able to educate more Albertans on the values of it, because again, like David's saying, parents are most involved at the elementary school level, and they tend to get less and less involved as their kids get older. And so parents who are super engaged, hyper engaged, are at the elementary school level. They're not really thinking about GSAs at that component, right? But we need to think about it. We need to talk about what kind of public education system we want. We need to talk about how do we help our most marginalized population. But we need our government to show why that's important and to help educate Albertan voters, so that when they do things like Bill 24 and they come out with these bills and legislation, that Albertans come at it from an informed position, and they're not so easily swayed by the rhetoric of government overreach, of government wanting to raise your 5-year-old, and of parents being excluded from their child's education. And that, unfortunately, is where we are right now in the discourse.
Yes.
And let's remember the history of GSAs. This was Laurie Blakeman, Alberta Liberals, Laurie Blakeman's Bill 202 that was kicked around the legislature like a political football. The PCs brought in their own Bill 10. It was put on pause. It was warped and twisted, and then it was spat out the other end, looking very similar to Laurie's original bill, but with a whole bunch of political baggage attached to it. And we're seeing that same thing here, and it reminds me of the NDP's rollout of Bill 6. Again, that was another Liberal initiative. Dr. Swan has been pushing that for a long time, that farm workers didn't have the rights in this province that they had in any other province or any other workplace, and we needed to better protect those rights. But the way the NDP sometimes rolls out these initiatives, it's in a very heavy-handed fashion, ham-fisted. With respect to Bill 6, they didn't explain how the regulations would work and that family farms would be exempt, and then they sort of roll it out not very competently and not with proper communication, and then we end up with all this confusion and politicization and polarization, and it doesn't end up helping the subject matter that the bill is meant to address. In Bill 6's case, it was ordinary farm workers that didn't have workplace protections. In this case, it's vulnerable youth in our schools that are paying the price for this for the way that the NDP seems the capacity they have to govern and to communicate their policies.
If you just give me one quick moment, I'm trying to call Nikki on Skype, so let's try that here. So if you hear this noise, we're going to see if we can get her connected. We lost her on Google Hangout, and we've been... Oh, look, I think we have her, hopefully.
I'm here.
There we are. Nikki is back. Can we hear everyone? Yes. So now Google Hangout and Skype have joined forces to bring this podcast. Thank you. Nikki, we just need you to catch us up. So we've talked about Kenney and what he did, and we are having a conversation about where the NDP has went wrong here. And okay. I'd love your opinion. I'm going to see how close you are to what Barb and David have said. I'm grading you.
So I took an opportunity to take out I went back to the School Act, and because this is, of course, an amendment to the School Act, and what are the abilities to cause people to make the changes that are required, or to punish them if they don't do so. And there's two things that came to mind. The first thing was Kenney has said, and I completely disagree, that teachers should be able to make the decision as to whether or not the parent should be notified. The first thing that raises every alarm bell in the world to me is based on what? What education does a teacher have to make a home assessment? How do they decide that it's okay to come forward and say your child is now involved in a GSA. They don't have that professional designation. And for Kenney to say that is ridiculous. But conversely, for the NDP to say we're not going to allow for any notification. Well, they didn't say, however, so I went through the bill quite clearly several times today. They didn't say about notification. What they did say is the only thing that they can release is the fact that the GSA exists, and which is fine, except there's no teeth in that. So it harkens back to the School Act and says, well, the punishment is in the School Act. And I went back to the School Act, and the School Act says it's at the discretion of the minister. Now, I know I've said a couple times to a number of individuals, the minister has done nothing to date. So what is he going to do now?
Weird. We just heard this already. You're on the same page.
Under David Egan's watch, no kids were protected. There are 0 children that feel safer because of David Egan. And you have, 10, 15 years of NDP policy that's spouted off from opposition, and they haven't implemented any of it. And you even pull Sandra Jansen into the mix, and I don't have a whole lot of love for Sandra Jansen because she is pretty much all about Sandra Jansen, and yet there's nothing accomplished for a child. A child doesn't have the ability to protect themselves, so they have to find other avenues. The scariest thing for me is with all of the pontification and politicizing of this particular issue, we have essentially made GSAs or QSAs, as my daughter was involved with, the scariest place in the world for somebody who's trying to protect their privacy. Because why would you come forward at this point? Why would you go to a GSA if you were trying to protect yourself?
That was the goal, right?
Agreed. I told 100%. I mean, my daughter was the purple-haired kid that called out Gordon Dirks when he started going into her QSA at Vic. But regardless, the changes have not been effective. And in fact, when I talked to her about the fact that I was going to be on this podcast today, she said, and excuse the language, why the fuck are we still talking about this?
Go ahead, Barb.
No, I'm just going to say that parental notification, along with a lot of other very heavy-handed coded language that Kenney uses, parental choice, government schools, independent schools, it's all very coded language. So when you talk about parental notification, what he's saying is that that's a roundabout way of shutting down GSAs and QSAs. Who's going to join? Right? It's very lovely to say, I support GSAs. I support them with parental notification. Well, that's a backhanded way of shutting them down.
100%.
Well, and let's not let the NDP and the other parties off the hook either. Laurie Blakeman brought forward this bill, and I think it was late 2014, and we're into early 2015.
I loved it.
We're now 2.5 years later, and we're still going around in circles, and GSAs are still not implemented in a large percentage of schools. The AHS... there was a leaked report by Alberta Health Services that something like 23% of schools are flouting the law, and so why have we gotten so little out of the last 2 or 2.5 years?
Well, and why are we continuing to let kids die? I mean, it sounds inflammatory, but it is the case. Why are we continuing to politicize this issue? The kid doesn't care who's standing up for their rights. They just don't want to be in jeopardy. And it makes me sick because exactly like my daughter said, why are we still talking about this?
And I'd like to add that why are we still talking about this? Extend that to say, why are we still letting Kenney dictate this conversation? Why is Kenney still the focus of this conversation? The truth is, the NDP will pass this bill. They have a majority government. We should be celebrating that we are strengthening laws that support kids, that supports LGBTQ kids, that looks out for their mental health and safety. But instead of celebrating a bill that is getting strengthening these laws, we're talking about Kenney again, and Kenney gets to distract and alter facts. And
I think I'd like to answer that question. It's because David Egan has been so completely soft on providing any guidance here. And the people who suffer are not the political forces at will. It's not the various parties. It's the kids. And
no, and in fact, the NDP is benefiting by creating this monster in Kenney, because that's a perfect foil for them to joust and spar with for the next year and a half leading up to the election. So that's the other half.
And what kid is saved by that? I mean, I look at it from that point of view. So a long time ago, Gordon Dirks was talking about Bill 10, and he went to the Vic QSA. And my daughter said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, why are there not more girls here?" Not knowing that there were 2 girls there that weren't actually. But he was just naive and stupid. This is even more egregious because David Egan knows these issues are here, and he is not acting. And that's the reason he is being inactive, is because of political forces. He doesn't want to lose the vote. In the meantime, kids still die.
Is the other theory in this, and I'm just asking this, and I was, Barb, when you said, why are we bringing up Jason Kenney, I'm going to throw the scenario out here. What if Jason Kenney wins? Let's say he wins. Let's say the UCP wins. What is your impression of what would happen to this bill? Did I just ask the most awkward question of all time?
I think the bill will be passed. I think it'll be dragged out as long as possible because the NDP wants to make as much hay about this as possible. So they'll stand up in the ledge and make as many speeches and put out as many press releases and tweets as they can to torque this issue up in their favor. But it will be passed because they have a majority, and we're supporting it too, and so is the Alberta Party for good reason, because the substance of the bill is important. But it'll be passed, and then I think if Kenney wins the next election and is premier, they won't touch it because they will have won the next election, and it won't serve any political purpose for them to eliminate it. So, because I think a lot of the people in that party recognize that it's good public policy. They just are playing along with their leader because many supporters in that party, or many of the operatives in that party, are more focused on power than principle.
Well, and it's not a surprise that every family has somebody in it that is not heterosexual. It's not a surprise. So, even if people are saying, "Oh, well, I don't know if I support this or not," they do have somebody in their family who is homosexual. It's just as per the demographic, that's just the way it is. So it serves no purpose for them to reopen it again. And I think that Notley drops a lot of balls. There's so many opportunities for her to make wins here, and she keeps continuing to drop those balls. And Jason Kenney probably wins. But
yeah, I mean, there's a few things I think I agree. They will not revisit it. I think it would be foolish to reopen that.
Yep.
But what they will likely do is find ways to let schools and school boards operate more autonomously, and find ways to let them operate in between the laws, around the laws, over the laws, and not be accountable to the laws, because they will call them independent schools. So that's how they'll try to get around.
I agree, but I think there is currently in the NDP government no accountability to the law either. There's nothing here right now that is saving a kid. There's nothing.
Well, because the laws leave the discretion to the minister ultimately, and the minister can decide that there's too much on his plate, or there's more study that needs to be done, or
oh God, I'm so sick of the studies.
Or consult more, and but I mean that's the political system we live in. That the elected, the buck stops with the elected officials, and so the human frailty and other human failings can rapidly enter into it.
So, what has the NDP gotten right here? Is there something we can praise them about?
I think the bill is written with good intent. It does harken back to the Charter. It does harken back to the Bill of Rights. I think it is written with good intent. I think some of it is written just to clarify language. And that's very, so, I'm a bureaucratic bum. I love the legislation. So if they're tightening up language, there's nothing wrong with that. But the fact that there is actually no teeth in it whatsoever, and there's no repercussions, and it's hard for me to find something that's right other than its clarification of language. And
it's valuing student safety over ideological or religious concerns.
But they already have that safety, David. They already have it. That's been enshrined with in Canada. They already have that.
Barb?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what they should be doing, there's two things. One of the things they should be doing is they should be celebrating this bill. They should stop trying to use this as an opportunity to paint Kenney as a monster. I think that's actually going to come back to bite them. I don't think it's nearly going to be as effective as they think it's going to be. It wasn't effective down south of us to highlight all of the personal failings of someone as a means for them to not get elected. I mean, if you can elect someone like Donald Trump down south, surely being opposed to GSAs is not the most egregious thing you can be and still manage to get elected. So this is not the deal breaker they think it is. Attacking Kenney consistently is not going to pay the dividends they think it will. And so I think they need to refocus, celebrate what Bill 24 does, acknowledge the spirit in which it was written, promote that it's legislation that strengthens the safety and confidence of our most marginalized students. And they need to start talking about having a proactive vision instead of a reactive sort of twitch to everything Kenney says and does. And, Bill 24, the bonus of it was the fact that there were and there are schools in Alberta who flagrantly, blatantly say they will not adhere to Bill 10 and have said that. So Bill 24 was needed, but it was something that they should have celebrated as an initiative they were taking and not a reactive position.
They should have focused on the evidence base of the policy. They should have focused on the children and the studies and the facts and evidence that underpin the legislation, and focus less on the actors involved on the political scene.
And I think that there's, sadly, what she has done is, probably not Rachel, but regardless, what the NDP have done is they've seen what had happened in 2014 and 15, and they thought, this is a hill we can die on. Unfortunately, what they didn't understand is every hill moves on, and they jumped on a hill that has long since moved on. And so they've tried to use this as the political wedge between them and Kenney. Now, do I agree with what it is that they're doing? 100%. But it's not got the same political power or oomph that they thought that it had, because that day is gone. And in today's politics, I mean, those sorts of oomphs, they move on fast.
And they're trying to use it as a shortcut to win the re-election. And is one observation I'll say along the same lines, and the other one along the same lines is there were other factors at play in Prentice's downfall. It wasn't just that he screwed up on Bill 10, Bill 202 turning it into Bill 10, and that was just part of a number of factors at play that brought him down, including 43 years of one-party rule. So for them to look back and focus on GSAs as the sort of silver bullet that will win them re-election is not even looking at the past in a factual manner.
Yeah, it's well said.
I want to bring up the next topic I want to bring up here, and maybe this is a good way to maybe end where we are. I know that we've been talking about the concern about teachers outing children. But let's toss a couple of other possible scenarios out here. One was brought up to me by someone on this panel, Vicky. Excuse me. What if, and I actually heard this from someone else too, what if a student outs another student? Whether that be through social media, spreading rumors, things like that. Does this Bill 24 specifically address that? Or is that something that we need to have a discussion more about?
You want my opinion?
I want you.
I think that there's no opportunity in this bill to prevent a child from being outed. There's nothing in here, in the several times I've read it, that prevents a child from being outed, regardless of where that outing comes from. So I'll share with you, we house several trans children that are booted from their homes for various reasons. And they come to us and we help them. And if they want to trans, we help them do so. And if not, we don't. It's up to them. It's their choice. It's their lives. Those children, however, often go through, in some cases, huge amounts of abuse, and in some cases, veiled assistance from their parents, but they don't feel that they have the necessary supports to do so and to do what it is that they require to do for themselves. So we help them with that. We don't lead them. We don't guide them. We don't tell them what they need to do. Very often, in fact, in 100% of the cases of the kids that we have had through our house over the years, they have all been outed by fellow students. It's not the teachers. It's not helpful individuals in the society. It's other kids. And we've seen, we had one kid that came to us, who suffered horrific abuse at the hands of his parents because another child outed him. I don't think that this bill does anything to help them. My own son is part of the GSA in his school, and he's there because his sister is gay, and very vocally so. They say to him, well, if you're in the GSA, you must be gay. And he's not, and were we different parents who thought that being involved in the GSA was harmful? I don't know, we're not those parents, but I don't know what would happen. I don't think that this stops it at all.
And unfortunately, if I can jump in, there are limits to government, to what a government can do, and we can't. First of all, in my experience, a lot of times when people out other people, it's not. It's sometimes more of a reflection of the person doing the outing, that they have some internal issues they're dealing with. So to punish children for outing other children we may just end up punishing gay children who are not out themselves, who are outing others in deflection or projection, or whatever the term is, psychological term. And also, we can't be punishing children who are outing other children. I think unfortunately it's got to be and this is happening in our society. It's sometimes slower than we want, but wholesale change in our attitudes towards gay and LGBTQ people, and so that everyone is more understanding and more inclusive, and there'll be less tolerance of that kind of thing from kids to other kids if their role models are better. And unfortunately, this whole politicization of GSAs is not providing those role models, because everyone's digging into their camps, and we're providing poor role models to our children, who then see that this is the kind of issue that's controversial, and then they think they can, in their immaturity, score points amongst their friend circles if they out someone. So it's a much bigger issue than a bill can address.
Well said. Well said.
I think it's incredibly circular logic. First of all, kids can out kids with or without GSAs, and it happened when I was a kid. It happened before that. So the presence or absence of a GSA does not inhibit anyone from outing a fellow student. Secondly, if that's the concern, then GSAs are of paramount importance, because it's in the GSA, it's at the GSA, it's because of GSAs that students will learn to accept and be tolerant of and celebrate diversity and understand the spectrum of gender identity. So if that really is a concern, if we're concerned about children accepting each other or outing each other or disrespecting their individuality, then we should be promoting GSAs and QSAs even more so.
I agree. Can I just ask one question? And I it's a valid question. I'm not calling you out or otherwise. The question is, how do we bring those people that are in? My daughter has a Muslim woman who is gay and is scared to come forward, wants to join the GSA, but there's so much publicity and politicization of the GSAs right now that she refuses to join. How does that get rectified?
Well, I mean, I think if you're going to go into an exact individual situation, I think you call it something else. I mean, if it's a matter of this person, life or death, and this woman, this student needs a place, for those purposes, call it something else until you can get to the point where she feels safe, because their safety has to come first, right? Until we can get to the
because I just want all the politicians to pull out and let the kids share their experiences. That's where I sit. Get everybody out of that mix.
But unfortunately, and I think the reason we need the legislation, from my perspective as a public education advocate, is to draw it back to funding. If you cannot provide a safe and secure environment for children under the guise of public education, then you should not be getting the funding. And that, to me, where the strongest component for that argument lies.
Right. I'm wondering, I guess, with it, I guess for me, the question that pops in my head is around the social circles. And I do agree with you, Barb. I think that helps. But we were all kids in school, and I remember some of the things that happened. And there are just ways that kids know to embarrass other kids that we can't even think of anymore. Because I just can't think of ways to embarrass people the way that I see sometimes how it happens. And that's where I'm curious about how. I'm not saying that this bill has to do it, but I am asking really where we go from here, because I'm either with this Bill 10 or even Bill 24, I'm pretty convinced that a couple of years from now, no matter who's in government, we're going to have a conversation about this and says, you know what, I think we need to rectify this, that, and the other thing. And there's some things that may not necessarily work that we're not aware of. And maybe
the
that
only way to do that is through lived experience, right? I mean,
yeah,
we talk about how kids treat each other. We don't have to go very far to see how adults treat each other,
no,
right?
no,
Get on Twitter for 20 minutes, and you'll
10.
see, like, yeah, exactly, and you'll see what David is alluding to is how we as role models set the example. Having said that, none of these things can be looked at in isolation. One of the things that we need to start doing is, and what this government is doing, is looking at the curriculum. This is why we need comprehensive sex ed from the minute kids get into school. We need to start talking about body agency and consent and all of these things, and all as a whole picture, as we develop the whole child. Ideally, we create a culture under which outing friends, you will never eliminate it completely. I don't think. Obviously, that would be the goal. But looking at it as a snapshot, as something that's going to solve the problem in isolation, is not the answer. It has to happen in conjunction with a new sex ed curriculum that is comprehensive, that includes sexual identity and consent and body agency in a way that helps to bring these kids to a point where they can treat each other with respect.
Cool. Is there anything else we should talk about before we close the podcast?
We're all
No, I
kind
think,
of outraged.
I would just hope that politicians would show some more leadership and be less concerned with their short-term political goals and more concerned with what they should be in politics for, which is making our society a better place for all. And unfortunately, we're all human, but it seems like too often we're too concerned about scoring political points on as against other parties or politicians, and less concerned about the bigger picture, about what this very bill is about. And it's about protecting our youth from homelessness and suicide and depression, and making our society a more inclusive place so that we can all succeed in our endeavors and live fuller lives. And that should be the goal of politicians and politics and legislation. It shouldn't be to win political points or get reelected or kick the other guys out of office. It should be about bigger things than that.
I would agree, and I would only add that I think Albertans want a vision. They want someone to show them a vision of something bigger and grander, to all the points that David is making. Show us what we can be. Show us how to get there. Show us the society that we're all dreaming of, and put into motion the plans and legislation that will get us there. But we see enough bickering and fighting everywhere in social media, on the road and road rage. We don't need to see any more of it. We want leaders not just to represent us, but to lead us. And that means having a vision.
I'd like to see the opposition parties do what they said they were going to do. So I've sat in that house for many, many years, and I would like to see somebody come forward and do what they say they were going to do. I heard Rachel say, Premier Notley say, I'm proud to support Bill 24 and what it protects children. And the only question that came into my head was how? How does this protect children? It doesn't. Give it teeth. I'd like to see something that is responsive to the needs of those who are actually hurting, as opposed to responsive to the needs of the politicians that are looking for re-election.
Yep.
Well said. Well, let's close it here. It is 11:01 in Alberta, so I'm assuming that people have to go to sleep. So as we are recording,
have more wine.
more wine. Yeah. Can you imagine?
Where do you live? I'll be right over.
Yeah, I'll fly over. Barb, how can we follow you on Twitter and social medias? And
So our Facebook page is Support Our Students Alberta, and our Twitter is @SOS Alberta.
Yeah. David, how do we follow you on Twitter? And do you have any announcements? I'm just kidding.
Dave_Con is my Twitter handle. Otherwise, you can put my name into Google, and I think most of the first 2 or 3 pages will be me. So pretty easy to track down.
Cool. Nikki, are you on Twitter, or is there a way we can...
I'm not. I used to be, and I'm not anymore. I started writing a book about everything that happened while I was at the legislature, and so I bailed out of Twitter.
It's probably better for your mental health.
Yeah.
You can see the book when I publish it.
I am on Twitter. You can follow me at KVOLE. You can Spreaker.com, KVOLE, SoundCloud.com, KVOLE, Twitter, KVOLE. Add me as a friend if you want on Facebook, Kevin Olenek. You can subscribe on YouTube, Kevin Olenek as well. I really appreciate the conversation that we had. I think it was very beneficial. I think it was a good conversation to have about a very important topic. So I really appreciate you guys staying up late to join me for this. So thank you.
Thanks for having us on. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I learned a lot.
Yes.
And thank you, Barb. Thank you so very much, actually.
Oh, thank you all. It was a pleasure to be on. It's always good to chat.
Cool. Next ones we are doing, we will be finishing up the Me Too series, bringing the men of that conversation and the women together. I believe that will be sometime early next week. Can't promise. We're also going to be talking to some actors in Vancouver about the Vancouver film industry in light of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, because there are some issues in the Vancouver film industry that are coming to light. There was a recent town hall in town about that for women only, so we're going to talk about that. And we are also going to be talking to some people about living here in Vancouver, because there was another, I love you, Vancouver, but I'm leaving you, Vancouver, because you suck letter. So I've actually connected with some Vancouver entrepreneurs who are willing to respond to this letter, people that have actually invested in this community, to see what they have to say. Is she right? Is she wrong? What's going on? Is it more than just the stupid economy housing crisis here that goes on every day after day after day? I sometimes want to bang my head on a computer. You guys, you have to understand. But anyway, I love it out here. It's a great ocean. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.